Brian Cashman had a plan. A real, specific, carefully built plan heading into this year's trade deadline, built around fixing exactly one part of this roster before time ran out. Then, in the 8th inning of a game that was supposed to be a routine, encouraging win, his best remaining healthy outfielder pulled up lame rounding first base, and that entire plan suddenly needed a rewrite with less than a week left on the clock. Here's the full story of how Cody Bellinger's hamstring injury just complicated one of the most important trade deadlines in recent Yankees memory. Quick hello if you're new here. This channel breaks down the real stories behind baseball's biggest headlines, grounded in what's actually been reported. If you want more breakdowns like this one, go ahead and subscribe right now, because this Yankees deadline situation just got a lot more complicated in the span of about 24 hours. Let's get into it. Let's start with exactly what happened, because the injury itself matters just as much as the timing. Saturday night in Philadelphia, during a 3-1 Yankees win over the Phillies, Cody Bellinger legged out a double in the 8th inning off Phillies reliever Jonathan Bolin. Rounding first base, he felt a grab in his left hamstring, immediately alerting the coaching staff that something wasn't right. He stayed in the game to run the bases, but told manager Aaron Boone afterward that he would have had real trouble scoring from second base on a ball put in play, and he was replaced in left field the very next half inning. Bellinger initially downplayed the severity of it to reporters after the game, saying it just felt a little tight and that he didn't think it was anything too serious. By Sunday, the Yankees weren't willing to gamble on that optimism, placing him on the 10-day injured list with a left hamstring strain, with outfielder Spencer Jones recalled from AAA in the corresponding roster move. Then, on Monday, the news got considerably worse. Boone confirmed Bellinger is dealing with a grade 2 strain, an injury serious enough to keep him out for an estimated 4 to 6 weeks, a timeline that pushes his potential return dangerously close to, or possibly even past, the trade deadline itself, and puts real doubt on whether he's fully right again before the stretch run of the season even begins. To understand why this specific injury landed with so much extra weight, you have to understand exactly what this Yankees outfield situation already looked like before Bellinger ever went down. New York has spent this entire summer already missing 2 of its most important names. Reigning American League MVP Aaron Judge has been out since late May with a stress fracture in his right rib, a recovery that's dragged on for months with no firm return timeline even now. Giancarlo Stanton has been moving slowly through his own running progression after suffering a pair of right calf strains, another key power bat unavailable for extended stretches. Bellinger, up until this past weekend, had actually been the one consistent, healthy presence holding the beat-up outfield together, an all-star performer who'd been red-hot recently, hitting 16 for 43 over his previous 12 games, an outstanding stretch even if he hadn't gone deep since mid-June. He'd also been a legitimately elite defender out there, entering Sunday with 19 defensive runs saved, second best among all outfielders in the entire sport. Losing that exact player, at this exact moment, isn't just losing a bat. It's losing the one remaining piece of stability in an outfield that's already been stretched thin for the better part of 2 months. Infielder Jose Caballero summed up the frustration pretty plainly in the clubhouse afterward, pointing out just how much this outfield group has already been through this entire season, with big names missing time throughout the year, and specifically noting how big a part of this team Bellinger has become. That's not just a throwaway quote. It's a genuine reflection of how thin this roster has actually gotten at a position that was supposed to be one of New York's real strengths heading into the year. Now here's where Cashman's actual deadline plan enters the picture, because this injury didn't just create a general outfield problem. It landed right in the middle of an infield-focused trade strategy that had already been taking shape for weeks. Heading into this deadline stretch, reporting had consistently pointed to Washington Nationals infielder C.J. Abrams as the single most realistic, highest impact target New York could actually pursue. Abrams, A two-time All-Star and one of the better all-around hitters in baseball this season, was viewed as the kind of plus bat that could immediately upgrade whatever infield spot he ended up playing, even with real, acknowledged questions about his defense at shortstop. According to insider Jim Bowden of The Athletic, there's genuinely a workable pathway for the Yankees to land Abrams, but it would require including their top infield prospect, George Lombard Jr., along with veteran shortstop Anthony Volpe, in whatever package eventually gets sent to Washington. The long-term thinking behind that specific deal made real sense on paper. Land Abrams now, eventually shift him over to second base, free up Jazz Chisholm to pursue a larger free agent contract elsewhere down the road, and let Lombard, one of the sport's genuine top prospects, take over at shortstop for the Yankees' next era starting as early as 2027. That was the actual master plan, built carefully around solving an infield problem that's been simmering all season, an offense that desperately needed another impact bat somewhere in that lineup. But Bellinger's injury just forced an entirely different, much more urgent question into the conversation, layered directly on top of that original plan rather than replacing it outright. With Judge still out, with Stanton still working his way back, and now with Bellinger sidelined for a real chunk of time too, the outfield picture has suddenly become just as pressing, arguably even more pressing, than the infield situation Cashman had already been quietly building his entire deadline strategy around. And that's exactly where this gets genuinely complicated for Cashman in the days remaining before the deadline arrives. Some analysts have already started floating the idea of stretching Abrams' fit even further than originally planned, wondering aloud whether the Yankees might actually try using him in the outfield instead of the infield, solving two separate roster problems with a single, expensive trade acquisition. The issue with that idea is that Abrams has almost no real outfield experience at the major league level, having played just 12 total innings out there for the Padres a few seasons back, and he grades out in just the first percentile among shortstops for defensive range, raising real, fair questions about whether asking him to learn an entirely new position in the middle of a playoff race is actually a realistic plan or just wishful thinking born out of sheer desperation for outfield help. It's the kind of creative solution that sounds appealing in theory, solving multiple problems with one big move, but comes with real, genuine risk if it doesn't translate cleanly onto the actual field once real games are on the line. There's also the matter of what it would actually cost to get a deal like this done in the first place, and that price tag only becomes tougher to justify with the roster now needing help in two separate spots instead of just one. Washington sports a 50-50 record through their first 100 games this season, and they're still very much alive in the National League wild card picture, which means trading away a talented, controllable player like Abrams would likely spell the end of the Nationals' own realistic postseason hopes for this year. That gives Washington real, legitimate leverage to ask for a genuinely steep return, and reporting has suggested exactly that kind of price tag, with names like Volpe, Lombard, and even outfield prospect Spencer Jones, the very player just called up to fill Bellinger's open roster spot, all mentioned as potential trade chips in various proposed packages. Washington has already shown this exact deadline season that they're willing to move controllable, talented players for the right controllable return, recently sending outfielder Curtis Mead, a player enjoying a genuine breakout season, to the Red Sox in exchange for young, controllable pitching. That's the same kind of return New York would likely need to offer if they're serious about landing Abrams, and the Yankees do have a genuinely deep stable of young, controllable arms that could realistically fit exactly what Washington seems to be prioritizing in these trade conversations. So what does Cashman actually do now, with the deadline bearing down and this new wrinkle sitting right in the middle of an already complicated set of decisions? League-wide trade deadline previews published just before this Bellinger news broke had already flagged the Yankees as a team looking for a right-handed hitting catcher, additional bullpen help, and possibly a bat, even before this specific outfield emergency forced its way into the conversation. Cashman himself has a well-established, well-earned reputation around the league for finding in-season relief pitching help when his team genuinely needs it, but outfield bats capable of stepping into a real, contending lineup on short notice, especially with the deadline just days away, are historically a much tougher, much more expensive item to find on short notice compared to bullpen arms. That leaves Cashman with a genuinely difficult set of choices heading into deadline week, choices that were far simpler just a few days ago before Bellinger's hamstring grabbed on that seemingly routine double. Does he stick firmly with the original infield-focused plan, still pursue Abrams as primarily an infield upgrade, and simply hope internal outfield options like Spencer Jones and Max Schumann can hold things together defensively and offensively for the next month or so while Bellinger heals up on his own timeline? Does he try to get genuinely creative and stretch limited trade resources across two separate roster needs at once, adding real complexity and real risk to an already difficult, high-pressure negotiation with Washington? Or does he pivot entirely, deprioritize the ambitious Abrams pursuit altogether, and instead search for a more modest, realistic, purely outfield-focused solution that doesn't require sacrificing quite as much of the team's long-term young talent in the farm system? Each path comes with real trade-offs, and Cashman now has to make that call with dramatically less time to properly evaluate his actual options than he had just 1 week ago, before this specific injury completely reshuffled the entire calculus. What makes this moment feel especially tense for Yankees fans watching from the outside is the broader context surrounding this entire season. New York has actually won 9 of their last 13 games heading into this stretch, a genuinely strong run given everything already working against this roster on the injury front. This isn't a fringe team quietly selling off pieces at the deadline, hoping for a better outcome next year. This is a legitimate contender, still fighting for playoff positioning, that keeps having its own best players forced out of the lineup one after another throughout the entire summer, an unusually cruel run of injury luck for a roster this talented and this expensively built to compete for a championship this exact season. Every single trade decision Cashman makes over these next several days is going to be scrutinized heavily, not just for whether it addresses today's obvious problem, but for whether it protects the organization's future while this current championship window remains genuinely open. So where does this all actually land as the deadline finally arrives? The honest answer is that nobody outside the front office knows for certain yet, and reasonable people within that same front office are likely still debating the exact right approach as these final days tick down toward the deadline itself. What's clear is that Bellinger's injury didn't just cost the Yankees a genuinely excellent player for a real chunk of the season. It fundamentally complicated a trade strategy that had been quietly taking shape for weeks, forcing Cashman to weigh a genuinely difficult set of trade-offs with dramatically less runway to get it exactly right. Whatever direction he ultimately chooses, this deadline was already shaping up as one of the more consequential ones in recent Yankees history, and this specific injury just raised the stakes considerably higher than they already were. That's the full story behind the injury twist that just complicated Brian Cashman's entire trade deadline approach. A red-hot outfielder going down at the worst possible moment, a carefully built infield strategy suddenly needing to account for an entirely separate roster emergency, and a general manager now racing the clock to figure out exactly how to fix both problems without sacrificing the organization's long-term future in the process. Keep watching this one closely as the deadline arrives, because whatever Cashman ultimately decides here is going to shape the rest of this Yankees season, and possibly several seasons well beyond it. This video is created for entertainment and informational purposes only. All information discussed is based on publicly available reports, interviews, and statements from credible sports media sources, and reflects ongoing developments that may change over time. Nothing in this video should be taken as confirmed fact beyond what has been publicly reported, and no claims are made about the private motivations or beliefs of any individual mentioned. Warning disclaimer. This video is created for entertainment and informational purposes only. Opinions and commentary are based on publicly available information, reports, and statements from credible sources, and reflect ongoing developments that may change over time. This is not an official statement from the New York Yankees, MLB, or any individual mentioned.